Hey all you cool cats and kittens, welcome back to Remote Learning with Miss Corwin. We are going to be continuing with our narrative writing. We are now on day 7, and truthfully this is probably one of the most important little lessons that we're going to talk about today, and we are going to be talking about the concept of show, not tell. So, when I say show, not tell, what I mean is that good authors will use their words to paint a picture in your mind. They don't just tell the readers about what is happening in their story, they show them with their language, with their word choice, with all these really nice things that help to build a really, really neat and complex and interesting story. So you might be asking, Miss Corwin, what do you mean by show, not tell? Well, let me give you an example. So let's look at the sentence here. It says, my mom was angry. So you're just telling me about how your mom felt. You're not showing me anything. You're just telling me my mom was angry. That's not a very interesting sentence. That doesn't really help us when we are writing narrative stories. However, if we look at this revised sentence here, it says, my mom's eyes narrowed and she pointed her finger at me and told me to go to my room. That's showing me that she was angry. They're using those details that show what anger looks like. When they say when it says my mom's eyes narrowed, she pointed her finger at me and told me to go to my room. That shows me that she's angry. You didn't tell me she's angry, but if you were to read the sentence by itself, you'd be able to say, uh-oh, that mom is angry. So let's look at another example. So remember, we are showing. We don't want to just tell. So here's another example of just telling. He looked happy. That's boring. That's a boring sentence. That's too simple. You're in 5th grade now. This is a sentence that'd be good for like a 1st grader. You need to be making sentences that are complex and interesting. So instead of just telling me he looked happy, show me what happy looks like. So here's an example of showing. As he walked, a smile spread across his face and his feet bounced with joy. If you read this sentence by itself, you would be able to tell that this person was happy. You don't need to just tell me he looked happy. Show me what happy looks like. Let's look at another one. So instead of telling me, I was worried because our car broke down. That's boring. You can do so much better. So you could say, I could feel my heart racing and a tightness around my chest. I looked to my mom to see how her face looked as the car broke down. So these little clues here, I could feel my heart racing, a tightness in my chest, looking to the mom. Those help me see that they're worried. You don't need to just tell me I was worried. Show me what worried looks like. Show me what worried feels like. These are the little things that are going to make your story so much more interesting. Let's look at another example. This could be an example from my story. So I wrote these sentences here. So my story, again, is the one about how we saw fireflies for the very first time. So instead of me just saying, it was dark outside, the crickets were chirping. That's boring. Get that out of here. No, we need something much more interesting. You need to paint me a picture. I need to show you what it felt like, even though you can't see it. So instead of saying it was dark outside, the crickets were chirping, instead I said the sun had set hours ago and the stars were a spotlight for an orchestra of crickets playing for the world to hear. So I didn't tell you it was dark, but these little clues in the sentence, the sun had set hours ago and there were stars out, that tells me that it's dark. The crickets were chirping. Instead, I said an orchestra of crickets playing for the world to hear. An orchestra is like a huge band, like huge group of musicians all performing. So instead of just saying that they were chirping, I said that they were an orchestra of crickets playing for the world to hear. This is a way more interesting set of sentences than this. Anybody could write this. A 1st grader could write this. You can do better than that. You are in 5th grade. We are almost done with 5th grade. I know you can do better. So we have another story today. This story is called The Memory String by Eve Bunting. And Eve Bunting does a really, really nice job of showing instead of telling in her story. So I'm going to let the story take it away.
The Memory String. Laura sat under the oak tree in their small backyard. Whiskers, her black and white cat, lay beside her, twitching his tail. On the porch, her dad and her new stepmother Jane were painting the railings. Jane stopped and pushed her hair away from her face. She wore an old paint-stained shirt and skinny-leg jeans. "Want some lemonade?" she called. Laura shook her head. While Jane was still looking in her direction, she took the memory string from the red velvet box on her lap. The buttons strung on the string shone and silvered, patterned with oak leaf shadows. Jane dipped her brush in the paint and went back to work. Her shoulders were stiff. Laura had pulled out the string a lot in front of her stepmother. "This was my great-grandmother's memory string," Laura told Whiskers in a loud voice. "Then it was my grandmother's. Then my mother's. And now it's mine." "Are you sure you don't want some lemonade?" her dad called. "No, thanks," Laura said. "If you're not doing anything important, you might come and help us." Jane's voice was sharp. "I am doing something important," Laura said. "This button came off my great-grandmother's first grown-up dress," she told Whiskers. "Back then, some people couldn't read or keep diaries, so a string like this was their way to remember. Mom told me." Whiskers yawned. "This button was my great-aunt's. She wore the dress to a quilting party. It's all part of our family's history." Whiskers got up to leave, but Laura took a firm grip under his stomach and crushed him against her, leaving her arms free. "Yow!" Whiskers warned. "Be quiet," Laura whispered. "I can't talk about my memory string to myself, can I? You have to stay here." These 3 buttons were from second cousins of my grandma's. The cousins were at a spelling bee. She peered up under her bangs. Dad was pouring lemonade. He took a frosted glass to Jane, and she sat back on her heels and smiled at him. Laura saw him touch Jane's neck under her hair. He did that often. Sometimes Dad and Jane sat on the porch at night after Laura had gone to bed. Her room was above, and she'd hear them whispering and laughing softly. They seemed so happy. It hurt to hear them happy like that. She rubbed the buttons between her fingers. Get to the good parts, she thought. Forget the cousins. Get to Mom. "This button came from Mom's prom dress," she told Whiskers. "Stop squirming," she added. "And this is from her wedding dress. It was white, of course. And see this little teeny tiny one? This is off my christening dress. And this one is off the dress I wore to my 5th birthday party. I remember." She stopped for breath and glanced up again at Jane. All this must hurt her a lot. For an instant, Laura felt mean and horrible. But only for an instant. She didn't hate Jane. Not really. It was just that Jane had gone and married Dad. She had to rush now because Dad was coming down the front steps. This khaki one was off Dad's uniform when he went to war in a place called the Gulf. Mom cut it off his jacket when he came home, and she cried and cried because she was so happy he was safe. Dad stood in front of her, bare ankles, old torn tennies. "Laura?" Quickly, before he could stop her, Laura said, "This last one fastened the neck of Mom's nightgown, The one she was wearing when she died. Dad saved it for me. She held up the memory string. It turned, the colors blurring through the blur in her eyes. Whiskers leapt. "Watch it!" Dad said anxiously, but he was too late. Whiskers' claws caught the string, scattering buttons like sunflower seeds. Laura covered her eyes with her hands. "Oh, no!" On the porch, Jane dropped the paintbrush and rushed down the steps. "It's okay, sweetie," she said. "We'll find them." The three of them searched the grass. "I found one," Dad said. "Here's another," Jane called. Whiskers watched from the top of the sagging fence. "Bad Whiskers!" One by one, Laura put the buttons carefully back in the box. "There were 43, she said. "I'm still missing 7. They found 6 more. Their knees were covered with dirt. Ants crawled over their hands and arms. They sifted through leaves and dead blossoms that had blown off the camellia bushes by the porch. "Do you know which one is still missing?" Jane asked. "The one from Dad's uniform. It was Mom's favorite, because... Tears streamed down Laura's face, and Jane took a step toward her. "Oh, Laura, my dear." It was what Mom would have said, and what Mom would have done. Jane's voice was soft, as Mom's would have been. But this wasn't Mom. Mom had died 3 years ago. This was Jane. "Dad?" Laura whispered, and her dad folded her against him. They searched again after supper until the light faded while Whiskers lay on the porch, lazily swatting bugs. When she finally went to bed, Laura couldn't sleep. "We'll find the button in the morning," Dad had promised. "And I'll help you restring them," Jane said. "Thanks, but I know how to do it," Laura told her. She lay, listening to the crickets, listening to Whiskers purring beside her. A little later, she heard the murmur of porch voices, and she got out of bed and knelt by the window. Jane and Dad sat in the swing. She could hear its soft creak. Bugs batted against the yellow light bulb. "But there won't be any difference," Dad was saying. "My old uniform is in one of those boxes we stored in the attic. I can cut a button off and drop it in the grass. She'll never know." "How can you think of such a thing?" Jane asked. "Those are true moments on that string. You can't cheat Laura like that." "But, sweetheart..." Laura imagined Dad taking off his baseball cap and rubbing his head the way he did when he was worried. "My little girl's heart is breaking. I only want to make her feel better." "Laura would rather have that button missing than have a replacement," Jane said. And then she added, "It's like a mother. No substitute allowed." Laura heard the chokiness in Jane's voice. She felt choked up herself. The swing squeaked as one of them stood up. "Let's look some more, right now," Jane said. "Now? You can't see a thing." "Flashlights," Jane said. Laura bit her lip. Should she go too? But then they'd know she'd heard. She watched the white circles of the flashlights, the dark figures of Jane and Dad crawling through the grass. She could smell the fresh paint. The crickets had stopped singing to listen. And then she heard Jane's excited voice. "I found it! Over here! It must have rolled." She held something up between her finger and thumb. "Whoopee!" Dad swung Jane around and around, and Jane laughed. "Careful! We don't want to lose it again. She'll be so happy. You can give it to her at breakfast, Janie. I don't think so, Jane said. She won't like it that I'm the one who found it. Let's just leave it on the porch, like a gift from a good fairy. Laura got slowly back into bed. Whiskers had moved into her warm place, and she slid him over. Grrr, he warned. She lay, thinking. Jane's sad voice sang, "It's like a mother, no substitute allowed." She remembered the soft look on Jane's face today, the way she had understood about the true moments on the string. So much to think about. So much. As soon as she wakened the next morning, Laura went downstairs. Jane was painting the back of the door robin's egg blue. "Like it?" she asked. Laura nodded. Already she could see the button on the porch. She picked it up and held it tight in her hand. "A good fairy must have brought it," she said. She noticed that the buttons on Jane's painting shirt were a deep dark green. Pretty. Maybe one day she'd ask Jane for one to put on the memory string. She swallowed. "Will you really help me restring them, Jane?" Jane wiped her hand on a rag and stood up. "Anytime you want," she said. "I'm here." The end. Please subscribe.
Awesome. So obviously you don't have to subscribe, but that story just has so many nice moments of showing. So what was really happening in the story is that she was just looking at these buttons, but at the same time she was telling us stories about these buttons and why those buttons were important, which is exactly what showing and not telling is all about. So what your job is for today is to rewrite some of these sentences. You have 4 sentences. They're on slide number 10, and I'd like you to instead show what happened in these sentences rather than just tell. So something that might help you would be to think about, what do these things look like instead of just telling me how it is. So it says Katie was so excited for her vacation. Well, how does Katie act when she's excited? What does she look like when she's excited? What do you look like when you're excited? What do you feel like when you're excited? So think about those feelings when you're working on this page. Ben was disappointed that he struck out. I'm assuming that's a baseball reference in case you weren't quite sure what that meant. So what does disappointed look like to you? How do you act when you're disappointed? How do you feel when you're disappointed? So think about those things. The baby was scared of the loud noise. What does a baby look like when it gets scared of a loud noise? How does it react? The cat was very hungry. Well, how do cats show when they're hungry? I have cats, and I can tell you for a fact that when they are hungry, they just yell. They just yell over and over and over again until you feed them. So your job for today is to work on this slide number 10, and to rewrite these to show rather than tell. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to let me know, but that's all I have for you right now, and I will see you tomorrow. Thanks, everyone.